I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Welcome back to Seamwork Radio, where we share practical ideas for building a creative process so you can sew with intention and joy. Today, we're talking about our favorite sewing tools and notions for knit fabric. So we're going to cover lessons we've learned sewing knitwear, the tools you might want to invest in, and the notions to always keep on hand in your sewing room. All right, Haley, our icebreaker for today. What's your worst sewing blooper when it comes to sewing knits?
Okay, so I think that my worst sewing blooper was my first ever knitwear project. And I decided of all things that I wanted to make a V-neck t-shirt. If you've ever sewn a V-neck t-shirt, the V-neck is indeed the hardest part.
Yeah.
And I ripped out that neckband so many times that by the time I finally set it in place without like major puckers, the center front of the neckline was so stretched out, I could have fit like a traffic cone in there or something. It was just very protruding and stretched out, and no amount of steam could fix it because it was just completely ruined. It was awful. And there was a couple issues. I used a fabric that had absolutely zero recovery, so it was really unforgiving. And then on top of that, I just had no like tools or techniques on how to stabilize my knit fabrics when necessary. After that, I slowed down and I took the time to like learn a couple tips and tricks, and 90% of my knit projects since then have been a success. So it was kind of a happy mistake because it taught me a lot. What about you?
Mine is actually, it's not even a knit because I sewed this dress and it was from a vintage pattern, and I finished the whole dress and only afterwards realized that it was intended for knit fabric.
Oh.
And I sewed it out of a woven fabric. So luckily it was a gauze, so it had a little bit of stretch to it, just the mechanical stretch. And actually it was okay. It was a little bit more snug than it had been intended to be, but it worked out okay, I guess. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I had paid that little attention to the fabric choice.
Was it a standing only dress, or could you sit in it?
Pretty much, yeah. And I still actually have it, but I never wear it because it doesn't fit the way it's supposed to fit. That's my worst one. And if you have an icebreaker for a future episode, a question that you think we could use for a future icebreaker, you can leave it for us in a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and we'll answer it in a future episode. All right, well, let's get into our topic for today because we have a lot of stuff to share. So we're talking about knits, and I absolutely love sewing with knits because they're fast, they're easy to sew, and as someone who really likes to be comfortable, I wear them all the time. But when I first started sewing with knits years and years ago, I had no idea that there were so many tools out there that could make the job way, way easier. And Haley, it sounds like you were in the same boat with your V-neck.
Yeah, I just kind of went for it and didn't even like stop to consider the tools that would have made it easier.
Yeah, so today we're going to save you the hassle of all those wonky knit projects that I went through to learn about this stuff and Haley went through, and share our absolute favorite tools and notions for sewing knits. Plus, I have a video coming out on YouTube this week with 20 knit tips in 10 minutes. So if you want even more great ideas for sewing knits, definitely subscribe to our channel. You can find that at Seamwork Video on YouTube. So how often do you sew these days with knits versus wovens?
This is a tough question because I feel like I sew with knits in phases and in batches. I'm a t-shirt person. I love having t-shirts to like layer underneath things. And when I make those, I tend to make like a few at a time.
Yeah.
All at once. A real fan of batch sewing my knits. So as of right now, I think that the last time I sewed a knit project was probably, oh my gosh, maybe like 6+ months ago.
Oh, really?
I'm on a wovens kick right now. But I would say that my like ratio, maybe in the ballpark of like 20% knits.
Okay.
To 80% woven, something like that.
More of a woven person.
More of a woven person, yeah.
Yeah, I would say I'm probably pretty close to 50-50.
Yeah.
I'd probably maybe 40-60 knits, maybe a little bit more wovens. But I do like sewing with knits, and I like to kind of alternate my projects and do some easy projects alongside the harder projects. So I'll do a more complicated project, and then I'll switch to an easier project. And the knits are often the easier projects
Yeah.
because they tend to be faster. And I do wear a lot of knits. I wear a lot of like long sleeve t-shirts in the winter, and I like to have things for layering like you. So I like to include them in my wardrobe plan just for that ease. Do you have a favorite knit fabric to work with?
I don't know if there's a knit fabric in particular, but I have some qualities that I like to look for when I'm shopping for knit fabric. I like a little sturdier knit fabric. I'm not as much of a fan of something that's really drapey or thin. I just find that it doesn't launder well over time. So I tend to look for things that are a little bit more substantial, and I like something that has a little bit of recovery. So I like 2% spandex or lycra, or to 5%. I feel like that's my like sweet spot
Yeah.
where it doesn't make it, once you get over that amount, sometimes it starts looking like a little like shiny athletic-y. Those are two of the qualities that I look for in my knit fabric. What about you? You have a favorite knit fabric?
I have a few. I love rib knits. They can be a little persnickety because they're so stretchy. They can stretch out when you're sewing them. You know, some of the tools that we're going to talk about can help a lot with that. But that's one I really like just because it has such good stretch. So rib knit is a knit and purl. So those are the stitches. You have a knit and then a purl, then a knit and a purl, or knit, knit, purl, purl. And that makes it automatically a lot stretchier. So I really like rib knits. I'm wearing rib knits right now. But I also really like French terry. It's just so cozy and soft, and it's good for so many different projects. And I like sweater knits a lot. They vary so much, but I think they're really fun to sew with, and you get some different looks with them.
It's like a whole other ball game.
Yeah.
Sewing with sweater knits.
Yeah. I think it's really fun. And I just love wool. I wear a lot of wool. So I think wool knits, wool sweater knits are really fun to work with.
Okay, well, we're going to jump into some of these tips that we have for you today with all of the cool tools and notions. And I'm going to kick us off with a ballpoint or a stretch needle. So these needles are specifically made for knit fabrics, and they have a slightly rounded tip that prevents any snagging or damaging of the fibers in the fabric. Sometimes you'll find these labeled as jersey needles, not necessarily just ballpoint or stretch, although kind of depending on the brand, you'll see it labeled as all three. You can't really see that well with the naked eye, but the slight roundedness to the tip of the needle means that it glides between the fibers rather than piercing through them. This is really important for knits because if you pierce through those fibers, you can actually get a run in your knitwear. If you've ever had a pair of tights or stockings and there's been a run, that's basically what can happen with your knit fabric as well. Have you ever experienced this with your knit fabrics before?
I haven't with anything I've sewn, but definitely I have in knitwear that's been purchased, or, socks, that kind of thing for sure.
Yeah. I've experienced it after I've worn it. That can happen often if you snag something, but something to look out for is sometimes if the fabric is, maybe you got it from a jobber or something, which is basically a person who buys from designers remnants of fabrics. Lots of times those fabrics can have runs in them before you even sew with them.
I have had that happen.
It doesn't necessarily speak to the quality of the fabric being bad. It can just be a mistake that happened in the factory when it was being rolled onto the bolt, or if it was sitting around on the factory floor and got snagged. So that's something to look out for when you're sewing your knits, is to just inspect it and make sure there's no runs in there before you get sewing.
Yes, I have had that. I had a silk jersey that I bought, and it had a run in it, and I didn't realize it until after I'd cut. I just cut a new piece. I had enough, but still. All right, our next tool that we recommend for sewing with knits, this one you might know about already, which is a serger sewing machine. So it's not mandatory, but a serger is really excellent for finishing seams and providing those stretchable, professional-looking edges. And it just makes sewing with knits a lot faster. Plus, you can use it to finish edges on your woven fabrics too. So I use my serger all the time for both purposes, both for finishing with my woven fabrics and then just for sewing together my knit garments. So a serger usually has 4 cones of thread. 2 of those are in the loopers, which loop around the edge of the fabric to enclose it. And the other 2 go in the needles to secure the looped threads in place. So I love my serger, and if you want to learn more about them, you can check out our class on using a serger, which is called Ready, Set, Surge. And that's really, really helpful if you're new to using a serger or you're thinking about getting one. How long did it take you to buy a serger from when you first started sewing for yourself, Haley?
I only got my serger about, I think, 7 years ago or so. But I'm a little bit of an outlier because I've always worked at places where we had a serger in the office. So if I needed to use one, I would just like bring my project into work and do a little after hours sewing. But if I had not had that be my case, I probably would have gotten one within the first couple years.
I did not get a serger until probably, I don't know, I was probably more than a decade into sewing by the time I got a serger. But I had always lived in really small places and didn't have a lot of room for extra sewing machine. And then once I had the space and had a dedicated sewing room, I got a serger, or a semi-dedicated sewing room, a place to put my sewing stuff anyway.
An additional 1 square foot to serger.
Exactly.
That's sometimes how it is.
Yeah.
All right. Our next tool is a walking foot. If you're using a regular straight stitch machine to sew your knits, you'll love having a walking foot. In fact, even if you're just using a regular sewing machine to sew knit hems or do top stitching, you'll definitely want to invest in this foot. A walking foot ensures that even feeding of your fabric layers, preventing stretching or any puckering, and it really helps in making sure that fabric doesn't get all stretched out as you sew it. And it's really useful for things beyond knits too. It's great for if you're sewing things on the bias, if you're sewing things that have a little bit of stretch fiber in them. I know a lot of people who just basically do all of their sewing with a walking foot.
Yeah, I have a walking foot on my machine. I was sewing knits last night. I was sewing knits and I was sewing a Sherpa knit as well last night, and I had a walking foot on there, and I thought I should just leave this on all the time. It's good for almost everything.
It is, yeah.
It's really helpful. It's great for quilting as well. I only bought my walking foot fairly recently because I have a Bernina, and they are kind of pricey for the Bernina, but it was a worthy investment for sure. All right, the next one is a twin needle. So a twin needle is another tool that's really, really helpful in your regular sewing machine. And a twin needle lets you sew with 2 spools of thread, creating these parallel lines of stitching that stretch with your fabric. So they're great for sewing hems on knits or for securing necklines down. And by the way, next month, we're hosting a skills workshop all about sewing hems on your knits, which is something a lot of people struggle with. So if you're really interested in learning these new techniques and perfecting your knit hems, you can join us for this workshop in April if you're a Seamwork member. And just go to seamwork.com if you want to join. And Erica's teaching that, and it's going to be amazing.
All right. I'm looking forward to that one. That's going to be great. Love Erica's classes. Our next tool are fabric clips. Clips are often better than pins when you're sewing knits, as they don't leave any holes or distort the fabric. And if you're using a serger, they can be really nice for avoiding snapping any pins with your knife and damaging your machine. So Wonder Clips are one of the brand names that you'll hear, which is just the clips that are made by Clover. But they come in lots of different sizes, lots of different brands make them, and I always like to have them on hand. Not only do they work really great for knits, they're also really great anytime you need to sew a binding on something, be it a quilt or a garment.
Yeah, I love my clips. I always have them right next to my sewing machine. The next one is woolly nylon thread. So woolly nylon thread is a special thread that has a bit of extra stretch and softness. So you can use it in the loopers of your serger. So remember, that'll be the thread that loops around the edge of your fabric. And you can also use it in the bobbin of your regular sewing machine. So there are 2 great things about woolly nylon. Number 1 is that it has extra stretch, so your seams will be even more stretchy and more secure. And then number 2 is it's extra soft, so it's perfect for any areas that are in contact with your body. And I personally am very sensitive to seams rubbing against my skin, especially in the winter, like right now when my skin is really dry. Anytime when there's cold weather, my skin gets really dry, and when the seams rub against my skin, I get just really itchy and irritated from it. So woolly nylon thread can help with that. One thing to note that Sienna told me recently, we were talking about woolly nylon thread, is don't wash these knit garments with anything that has Velcro because it'll catch on the woolly nylon. It'll be like the soft loop part of the Velcro and catch on it. So I had never even thought about that. So I thought that was a good tip.
Literally never occurred to me.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sienna.
I don't wash tons of things with Velcro, but occasionally I have like a jacket that has Velcro in the pockets. So
I was just trying to think, what do I have with Velcro? Probably children's wear. Our next notion is clear elastic. Clear elastic can be sewn into any areas that you need to stabilize to prevent them from stretching out. So let's define what I mean by stabilize. Have you ever sewn something with a stretchy fabric and afterwards it came out way bigger than you intended in certain areas? This is because it got stretched when you sewed. Or have you ever made or bought something in a knit fabric and it got really stretched out the more that you wore it? Stabilizing prevents this. In a knit garment, you're basically adding a bit more recovery to a certain area by sewing the seam to something more stable and elastic. I like to keep 1/4 inch wide clear elastic on hand for this purpose. The most common area that you'll want to stabilize are the shoulders on knit garments just because they tend to carry a lot of weight. And you basically just sew that 1/4 inch elastic right in with your seam and it prevents it from stretching out.
Yeah, super, super helpful. The next one that I want to mention, which you can use for a similar purpose, is knit interfacing. So Haley talked about stabilizing shoulder seams, and another thing you can do to stabilize shoulders and any other areas is to sew strips of knit interfacing. So knit interfacing is very lightweight and it has a little bit of stretch to it, so that makes it perfect for knit fabrics. So you can use it just like you would anywhere you use interfacing. So wherever your pattern calls for interfacing, you can use knit interfacing with your knits, or you can cut strips of it and use it in those shoulder seams or any other areas that tend to get stretched out. So knit interfacing is actually my go-to interfacing for a lot of woven projects as well. I always have it on hand, and I use it probably in 80 or 90% of my woven projects as well. So that's my favorite interfacing by far. So when it comes to stabilizing, do you prefer elastic interfacing or another stabilizer for seams, Haley?
I tend to gravitate towards knit interfacing for stabilizing. I use that, or sometimes I'll use knit stay tape, which is basically just knit interfacing that's been pre-cut into 1/2 inch strips. I buy that when I find it on sale so I can be lazy. I just find that clear elastic comes in really varying qualities, and sometimes some clear elastics can be really rigid, and I find that to be a little bit uncomfortable. If you can find the softer, stretchier stuff, definitely pick that up. It's nice to have on hand. I like that more for sweater knits, but I do gravitate towards the knit interfacing. What about you?
For shoulders and things like that, I use knit interfacing because I find it a lot easier to sew.
Yes.
Because you just fuse it right onto the shoulder, right in the seam allowance, and then you sew it, and it's very easy. Clear elastic can be just a little bit trickier to sew because you have to capture it in the seam, and it's narrow, so that can be a little bit tricky. But I do like to use it in areas where you need a lot of stretch, but you don't want it to get stretched out. So, for example, maybe the waistline of a knit dress. You want it to be able to stretch over your body and get it on, but you don't want it to stretch out over time. So I find clear elastic is good for that because interfacing is not as stretchy as clear elastic is. So it really depends on the use, but that's how I do things.
Yeah, that's definitely a great use for clear elastic. All right, our next tool, or tools, shall I say, is a rotary cutter and a cutting mat. One of the things that can go wrong with knits oftentimes is cutting. Knits can really easily get distorted or stretched out when you're using pins or fabric shears to cut. Even tracing patterns with chalk can be a little bit hard with the fabric moving around. Knit fabrics do just tend to be a little bit more squirrely on you. And that's why I really prefer to use a rotary cutter for knits. It's much easier to keep everything where it should be and make a much more precise cut.
Yes, absolutely. I love my rotary cutter. And the last one that we wanted to share today is Wonder Tape. So Wonder Tape is a narrow adhesive tape that then washes away later. So it's my absolute favorite for sewing knit hems because it holds the hem in place and it prevents it from getting stretched out at the same time. So I use it for neck bands on knit garments as well, and it just has so many other uses too. Like you can use it to hold buttons in place. You can use it to hem woven fabrics. You can use it to hold zippers where you want them while you sew. So it's kind of like glue basting that also stabilizes at the same time. So imagine kind of temporarily taping something into place, but at the same time, it keeps that area you're going to sew stable so it doesn't get stretched out. And then it'll just wash away later. So it makes the sewing look better, and then you can't even tell it was there in the first place. So Wonder Tape is one of those things I also always have on hand. In fact, I just ran out of it and I have to remember to buy some more. This made me think.
Did I ever tell you about the last time I cleaned out all my sewing notions and found like 12 half-used rolls of Wonder Tape?
That can happen. It's just like your kitchen, you find all these bags of nuts or whatever that you forgot about.
What was I doing?
All right, so those were the 10 tools or notions that we think help the most with sewing knits. So I'm going to recap them for you guys real fast because we went over a lot. So number 1 was a ballpoint or stretch needle. Number 2 was a serger. Number 3 was a walking foot. Number 4 was a twin needle. Number 5 was fabric clips. Number 6 was woolly nylon thread. 7 was clear elastic. 8 was knit interfacing. 9 was a rotary cutter and a mat. And 10 was Wonder Tape. So what was your big takeaway from today's episode, Haley?
My big takeaway, and this came from when you were talking about where you like to use clear elastic and where you like to use knit interfacing to stabilize.
Mm-hmm.
And what it made me realize is a lot of these tips are centered around kind of having an idea of when you want to add stability to your knitwear and when you want to encourage a little bit of extra stretch. And so that's kind of the tip I would encourage you to think of as you're sewing your knit projects. With each seam and with each step, do I want to create more stability in this step, or do I want to have a little bit of extra stretch? So what I mean by that is when you're cutting out, you want things to be nice and stable. You don't want things moving around and stretching. So you'll want to do things to encourage a stable behavior. Yeah. When you're creating a seam, you might want that to stretch a little bit with you. So you'll want to be choosing thread or stitches that are going to stretch with you. So just kind of asking yourself that at various parts of your project so that you can bring a little bit more intention to the techniques and tools you're using will be really helpful.
Yeah, sometimes there's a little bit more thinking on your feet that you have to do with knits.
Mm-hmm.
There aren't as many hard and fast rules because it depends so much on the fabric and what you're making.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a great takeaway. What I was thinking as we were talking is kind of goes back to something that we often say, which is if you have trouble with something, then it's usually either the tool or the technique. It's always either the tool or the technique. You just need to figure out a different way to do things, or you just need a different tool for the job. And I was thinking about that as you were talking about your blooper earlier today and how you didn't really know about all these special tools that can help you. And I just think it's a great thing to keep in mind because oftentimes we can get so frustrated and I don't know, I get angry sometimes at myself for making mistakes, but really it's just you didn't know exactly the right steps to follow or you didn't know the right tool for the job. So it just comes down to those things.
Makes the mistakes a little less personal feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a learning experience, like always. Well, we talked about so many great tools today for sewing knits, and a lot of them had to do with creating neat hems and finishes. So if you want to learn more about that in a really hands-on way while you sew your next knit project, sign up for our upcoming skills workshop all about hemming knits. It's running through the month of April, and it's available for all Seamwork members to participate in. So you choose the pattern you want to sew, and Erica will help you build the skills that you need. So not only do you make something now, you take that skill into all of your future projects. So if you want to participate, visit seamwork.com and click How It Works to join us. And if you liked this episode, please consider leaving us a review. We love seeing your reviews. You can also follow us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. You can follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to become part of the Seamwork community, head over to seamwork.com/go/podcast to learn how to join. And that's it for us this week. I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.